Hey,
Hi.
Marie.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you. How's the audio on your end?
Good. Good.
Awesome. Awesome. I
Yeah.
like I like your background. You have lots of books. Maybe
Yes,
some
my
maybe some
home office,
VHS tapes over here. Is that no?
just books.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hey, so we went to grad school together. I didn't recognize your last name, and like your picture, like you looked familiar to me, but it was just like your profile picture is just your face.
Right.
Um, and your last name has kind of changed. But so you're getting your PhD right now. That's awesome.
Yes. Yes.
How long have you been going?
I started the PhD program in 2015, so I'm coming up on 6 years this fall, where I'll start my full sixth year this fall. I'm a PhD candidate, which means that I've passed my comprehensive exam. So I'm ABD, all but dissertation. So almost finished.
And you're writing your dissertation. How long have you been working on it?
Um, about a year and a half. I mean, once you're in, my dissertation kind of plays off my master's thesis. So I've been working on it since I was at Tech getting my master's degree, but I've only been working on my dissertation, not taking coursework for about a year and a half.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've been in PhD school probably as long as it took you to get like your undergrad and your master's.
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Yeah, like when I think about going back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I could. I mean, I could do it. I could do it, but I have so much other
Absolutely.
stuff going on that
Right.
it would be a major. I know it would be a major sacrifice, right? Um, but I think about it quite often.
Yeah, it's a commitment. It is definitely a commitment.
Okay, so you're a mom. You're married. Is this both? So like, how is
Yes.
that? How is that balance of things?
It's difficult. It's difficult. I also am an adjunct professor, so I've taught at Tech, at the University of Ozarks in Clarksville, at Tech's Ozark campus, at Fort Smith. I teach at U of A. So it's a balancing act, and it takes a really good partner to be able to, and family, to be able to pull it off. So it is
Yeah,
difficult.
yeah. And so in what? And you still live here locally as well? Is that correct?
Yes, I live in Russellville.
Which, wow. So that's like another level. How often do you have to drive to Fayetteville?
Well, before the pandemic, of course, which we've been online since March. So haven't had to go up there, haven't been able to go up there since March. But before that, it was 3 days a week, pretty consistently.
Yeah. And that's like I went up there the other day, just like a morning trip, and I trained at a friend of mine's gym and drove back. And I got back around noon. I left relatively early. But it's not a bad drive, but it's definitely like, I mean, I drive like 25 minutes a day to Morrilton.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's like what, probably an hour and 45 minutes or something for
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
I can leave my house and park on campus as long as I can find a parking spot, which depends on how early you leave. In about an hour and 45 minutes. Yep.
Yeah. So what are your post graduate plans? Are you wanting to just get a tenure track position somewhere in out of state?
My goal would be to get a tenure track position. For the last 3 years, that has been increasingly difficult. And with the uncertainty caused by COVID-19, that dream it's for all freshly minted PhDs is rapidly shrinking, unfortunately. But that is, I mean, that's the goal. And that's the goal that I came into the program with.
Yeah. Well, and so you are kind of, and I want to talk about your research, and you are kind of specializing in uh, studies involving the South, right? So
Right.
are you open like it to moving out of state to someplace like maybe Ohio or something? Or are you trying to stay here in Arkansas, teach Arkansas history and contribute to that field? What do you like? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm pretty open to whatever. It would just depend on where jobs are. I would prefer to stay in the South because that is I mean, I study Southern politics, so that is my specialty. And all of the major archives that I need for my research are in the South. So that would be preferable, but it really just depends on what I'm able to do after I graduate.
Yeah, for sure. That's an interesting thing I've been thinking about. It's like I had a professor from Tech on, Neil Harrington, and he was talking about being like a northern artist transplant into the South and how he observes things. But I would say we probably need more historians in the South that can provide some commentary on what's going on. I'm not saying those people are not needed in the North, but
Right.
I'm also saying that they don't have to like overcome things like, I've been talking with a ton of people about the lost cause myth, and it's just a weird conversation I have to have with a lot of people that just like that, and they immediately are like, oh, but then there's a whole bunch
Yes.
of people that they're never going to come off that version.
No.
But I do feel like that's why it's important that we have Southern historians in the South to do that job, or whether they're Northern people coming in too, like. I don't know if that's, but it just kind of got me thinking about like how we don't need a lot of people leaving, because I feel like we can tell that story. Because it's like there's this group of bands I like, and there's Southern rock bands, but they're like anti-racist, like Widespread Panic, Drive-By Truckers. There's a guy from ASU who wrote his PhD from that program on the Drive-By Truckers. It was like 800 pages. But they're these non-stereotypical Southern rock bands, and they bring a message of peace. Like Drive-By Truckers, for example, they have like Black Lives Matter on the stage. They have a black fist. And I remember going and seeing them the first time only about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was like, these guys are awesome. And they were just but they were singing like they're a Southern rock band.
Right.
But they're singing about equality and just not what I feel like a lot of people would think when they hear, oh, it's a Southern rock band.
Yeah.
But
I think that's absolutely right, because my husband's also a historian, but he's originally from Maine and then Southern Florida, and then moved to Arkansas, where he taught at U of A, and is getting finishing up his PhD this summer. And we both teach our survey students, the lost cause, the myth of the lost cause. I know it from the inside. That's the history that I was taught growing up in the South. I teach it with a Southern accent. My students, based on our comparisons, my students do relate more to me talking about it than to him. He's a Yankee. He's got the accent. They know that he doesn't know it from the inside. So they feel like they're being preached at when he teaches it. So I do think it's really important to learn this uncomfortable part of our history from someone who knows it and who speaks the same way.
Yeah. That is a great point. So like, and like how I reconnected with you, and I was talking, was through Meredith, right?
Right.
Like I saw Meredith just share your name, and I didn't even, and then I was like, I got to know this person. and then I added you on Facebook, but and I saw you kind of share something to Meredith, but I was talking to Meredith about this. So I've been talking with people about this one specific topic. Not most people know what the actual flag of the Confederacy is, right? They assume it's the battle flag, right?
Right.
Like as a matter of fact, everybody I've talked to this week assumes it's the battle flag. Every single person. And I was like, and so I said to somebody, I was like, hey, do you know the Confederate flag's flying over Dardanelle? And they were like, no, I would have seen that. And I showed them a picture, and they're like, that's not the Confederate flag. I'm like, oh, yes, it is. It's the official flag of the Confederacy, and it's flying right here over this northward facing statue. And this was just recently brought to my attention. I was not aware that was happening either. But that seems to be something that I feel like if more people knew that was the actual flag of the Confederacy, they would have but we're starting to see this big call, even in the state. I've been seeing circulations of petitions around Arkansas monuments.
Yes, Bentonville.
Yes, that's one. Sebastian County, Fort Smith. But there's one right across the river from us in Dardanelle. And there's also the one in Hot Springs, to the side of 2 lynchings. It's at different points in their history. What is have you done any research on that. I mean, I know that's not really anything we talked about that we're going to talk about, but it's something that multiple people have engaged with me in conversations. Another graduate student just graduated, Thurman Storing. He's been on my podcast. He and I talked about this. He's super passionate about it. Like, what are your thoughts on that, and how do you approach talking with people about that?
Well, that actually is right up my alley because I study massive resistance. So massive resistance are the politics of opposing the civil rights movement. So the things that Southern politicians did, both socially, politically, legally, to curtail civil rights across the South. And one of the things that they did was they reimagined the Confederacy, and they started promoting the Confederate flag that people think is the actual Confederate flag. They started promoting these monuments. Some went up in the 1920s and the late 1800s, but a lot of these statues went up between the 50s and the 70s. And so it's not by accident that these have become the image of racism and systemic racism in the country. That was their purpose from the very beginning. And these were not put up right after the Civil War. These were things that were put up once African Americans were getting rights across the country. This was to oppose that, to say, you may think you have rights, but here is a monument that says that we're still in control. And so the fact that these things are coming down is both very surprising to me as a historian in the South and just amazing. It's just this amazing symbol of what this current movement is accomplishing.
Yeah, it's okay. So, and this is something I really don't know a lot about, and I don't know if you do, but I've been researching and reading about the UDC, but that actually led me to the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution. And they're actually who are responsible for not only putting up this monument in Dardanelle that I'm mentioning, but also responsible for designing the Arkansas state flag. Do you know anything about the Daughters of the American Revolution?
I know a little bit about how they helped. There's a lot of overlap between them and the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And women in the South after the Civil War played this important role, especially in school boards. So they were elected to these positions and had the power over textbooks that were going to be taught and stuff like that, or the information that was going to be put in the textbooks and whether it was going to be allowed in classrooms. And both of these organizations worked hand in hand within the same lost cause narrative. I don't know as much about the Daughters of the American Revolution, but I do know that they are similar enough to the United Daughters of the Confederacy. There's overlap there in the South.
For sure. And man, what threw me aback is I had been reading about them in passing, saw some connections, kind of like one led me to the other. Reading about the UDC led me to the DAR. And researching these Arkansas monuments. But then I just read on this Arkansas Encyclopedia today that they had designed our state flag, which has received some criticism over the years due to its similarity of it being not an X, just a diamond. But it looks very similar, right?
Right. And the fourth star saying that it was part of the Confederacy is another big deal with the state flag. Mm-hmm. I think I've seen calls to take the fourth star off lately.
I came across that. So that was something I was like, okay, well, that's something else I can add into my class.
Yeah.
Did you ever have Dr. DeBlack when you were?
Oh, yes. He was on my thesis committee.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So I've been talking with him. He's been helping me with my Arkansas history course. Right before the coronavirus, he hooked me up with a bunch of his PowerPoints and gave me some books. And but he was teaching Civil War online as a retired professor.
Oh, wow.
Not online, but face to face. And then he had to start teaching it online right around the time that I was hanging out with him. He was so frustrated about it, but it was. He's been helping me out big time and turning me on to a lot of great resources. And like he was talking, one thing he mentioned is neither one of those flags are really even flown in the state. The two most common that we're referring to in the Civil War in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't have seen that be a common battlefield flag. With
right. Yeah, the Confederacy was it was designed to be state-centered. So you don't have a united Confederacy during the war. The idea of a united Confederacy is part of that lost cause myth. So you wouldn't have seen one single flag in any area. That all comes from the memory of the war.
Two of the most fascinating things with the Civil War for me is the fact that we supplied more troops to the Union than any other state other than Tennessee, if my memory serves me correct. And also how, the Civil War in the Ozarks. I've been super fascinated by that. I've purchased, but I haven't read Brooks Blevins' newer books on, but he's sort of an authority on the topic. But its proximity to Missouri, and Missouri being a slave state that didn't secede, the northwestern portion of the state and in Civil War history is just like the most fascinating to me because of
I think so.
The Ozarks theater is just, it's different,
Right. And it doesn't get a lot of attention, but this is, the Union was having victories in the West while they were being defeated in the north, on the Eastern theater. And so it is extremely important to look at the Western theater, to look at the Trans-Mississippi theater, and Arkansas is part of that. And the fact that there are Unionists throughout the Ozarks that fight guerrilla warfare against Confederates, against their own neighbors, even after the war ends, is also part of the history of the Civil War in Arkansas that is often overlooked.
Yeah, certainly. So where does your research sort of kick off? I know you cover like all the same sort of areas I do in terms of just survey courses and general stuff, but like, where do you start with your narrative? Do you have like a primary focus, like a certain county? Like what can you tell me about your research?
So my specific research, or the way I teach my survey classes?
Well, just your specific research in relation to like what you're talking about with massive resistance in Southern politics. Like, do you start like Civil War, or the Old South?
Right.
Like, how do you, like, where are you kind of, what's your dissertation sort of encapsulate?
So I start in 1948, and I look at, I start in the 1940s. There are Supreme Court cases in 44 and 46 that are important. But in 1948, the Southern Democrats broke from the National Democratic Party and formed the Dixiecrat Party, or the States' Rights Democratic Party. Because in February of 1948, Harry Truman, he's running for re-election in 1948. He's got this New Deal mantle because FDR's died. Truman's running for re-election in his own right. And in February, he announces a 10-point civil rights agenda. And he wants to add this to the Democratic platform. And so the Southern Democrats, very different from the Democratic Party today, but the Southern Democrats revolt, and they form this new third party. And one of the main people responsible for this is Arkansas Governor Ben Laney. So Laney's governor in 48 in Arkansas. He plays this instrumental role in forming this new third party and fighting Truman, but he is not successful in Arkansas. And the Dixiecrats, to the media, they're kind of seen as this joke, Southern Democrats are they push a lot of conspiracy theories. There's a lot of propaganda, I guess what we would call fake news coming out of their rallies, and the national media does not pay them very much attention. They see this as the most that the Dixiecrats will get out of this, they think, is to deprive Truman of the election. But they do not think that the Dixiecrats will be successful. But what fascinates me about this moment is that Laney is so important to forming the party itself, but he loses in Arkansas. The Dixiecrats do not control the state party machinery in Arkansas. He doesn't run for re-election in 48, and there are rumors that he was going to run as a U.S. Senate candidate, and so he doesn't run in 48 for re-election for governor. But he campaigns hard for the Dixiecrats, and they all lose. And Arkansas actually gets a pretty progressive governor in 1948 in Sidney McMath. And so I just was fascinated by this dynamic in Arkansas because it's a southern state. I mean, there are historians that would disagree with this, but Arkansas was part of the Confederacy. It's a Southern state. And we don't really follow that mold of Southern politics. And so I start with that in 48, and then my main focus is in 54 after the Brown decision. So after the Supreme Court says that school segregation is unconstitutional and the South has to integrate its schools, you see this massive backlash to this Supreme Court decision. And one of the first organizations, or the main organization of what becomes massive resistance, is the White Citizens Council. And so I studied the White Citizens Council in Arkansas and its founder, or the man who brought the Citizens Council to Arkansas, James Johnson, or Jim Johnson. So my dissertation is essentially a biography of his political career, starting in 48 with this Dixiecrat revolt that Jim Johnson was this young man in his 20s in 1948, and he campaigned for the Dixiecrats. So that's where his political awakening began. And he was very much a student of Laney's. Laney funded his Johnson's state Senate career, and he funded his other political campaigns. And so Johnson really fit into that mold of the Southern Democrat, the Dixiecrat. And in 1954, he takes up that mantle at the state level of being the segregationist. And he brings a chapter of the Citizens Council to Arkansas in 1955. He proposes this amendment to the state constitution in 1955 called interposition. And part of massive resistance is to find all these laws and test all these laws and boundaries of how you could end the Supreme Court decision, how you don't have to follow that Supreme Court decision. So one of those possible laws is interposition. So the idea that the state constitution can trump the national constitution. So if the state says that integration is unconstitutional, that's the law that will be followed. The state can interpose its will. Yeah, and this, so yeah.
Like I just can't
this.
believe it. Like, you know, I that is the most mind-blowing thing that is like, oh, hey, yeah, because we're seeing that, for lack of a better comparison, we're seeing that same sort of stuff now in Russellville with like, yeah, well, if we legalize marijuana on the state level, we are not going to do it here locally.
Right.
Like just kind of picking and choosing where we want to follow along with state, local, or federal when it fits whoever's in charge.
Right. Exactly. And this is not unique to Arkansas. This was actually developed by a Virginian propagandist. And he spread a lot of these ideas throughout the South. So these segregationists, these networks were extremely connected. So they're sharing all the same propaganda, they're each trying different things until a court knocks them down. So in 1956, using this amendment as his platform, Johnson runs for governor. And at this point, the governor is Orville Faubus. And Faubus is elected in 54 as a kind of a progressive Southerner. He really is in the same vein as Sidney McMath. And in 54, the Brown decision wasn't a political issue in Arkansas. Faubus tried to mention it once and no one cared. Arkansans were not concerned with integration either way in 1954 when this decision was handed down. But Jim Johnson makes it his mission between 1954 and 1956 to make it the political issue in Arkansas. So he's going to work Arkansans up into this fear surrounding integration.
He's this Virginian propagandist?
No, sorry, Jim Johnson is the Arkansas politician.
Okay, sorry.
He's getting his ideas partially from this Virginian propagandist.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
So these ideas are escalating in Arkansas. We see that obviously blow up with Faubus calling the National Guard and so on.
And the only reason that Faubus calls out the National Guard is because in that 56 election, Jim Johnson makes segregation an issue. And white Arkansas voters begin to support segregation. And so now that is the issue that Faubus has to decide. And Johnson is an outspoken segregationist. He defended segregation at Hoxie, made Hoxie, the integration of Hoxie, a huge deal. And he has this amendment that he's running on. Well, during the election in 1956, Faubus comes out and says that no school district will be integrated under my leadership. And so he comes out as a segregationist and he wins re-election. But Johnson's amendment also passes. It's a ballot initiative. It passes, and it becomes an amendment to the state constitution. So Johnson's ideas won the election, even if he didn't. And the White Citizens Council stays on Faubus throughout 1956. And when Central High is ready to integrate in 1957, Jim Johnson and the Citizens Council is right there pushing Faubus to call out the National Guard. And he does it. And, we know that history well.
Did you see, I commented on I had made a status about this on Facebook. And one of the things that led me to make that post was someone was talking about the National Guard being called out, like in a passing way. And they were like, laugh out loud. Are you sure? Like, I mean, that's a verbatim quote. And I was like,
oh yeah.
Yeah. She's sure. Like here, let me, there you go.
Yeah.
Like here's a brief history with a photo. Look at the photo. But okay. And so I followed along with the post you made the other day it's very true. It's like, it's how you and I and they are remembered, these people that are yelling in that iconic photo, for example.
Yes.
But how some of these people now that are saying the things they're saying are going to be remembered. Like I saw a super atrocious meme shared on social media earlier, and maybe I was sensitive to it or whatever, but it had a picture of a combine in a cornfield, and it said, "Black lives haven't mattered since John Deere invented this."
Mm.
And I was like, that is the most repugnant and disgusting thing I have seen in a while. But it's not against community standards. It's an acceptable form of hate meme. But that is like what would could you go into that just a little bit, just for this audience? Is like, you said you've read like dozens of hours of people justifying, like, basically the arguments of what we're talking about of 54 to 57, like that shift, and how we're gonna refuse to do what has been mandated in terms of segregation. Like, what are some of the things that you read in those letters from that time, and like, what are you seeing now?
Well, I have spent a lot of time in the minds of segregationists over the past 5 or 6 years. It has, I'm kind of fascinated by conservative propaganda anyway. And these letters and these constituents are what fuel this. And so what I see, and you have to keep in mind too, which you know this, but 54 and 57, we're also at the height of the Cold War. And so you can justify being against anything if you accuse it of being communist. And so all of these massive resistors also said that civil rights organizations like the NAACP were communist organizations. They said the Supreme Court was a communist front, and it was ruled by communists, that Truman's government was communist. So they're also using that as this boogeyman. And you see the same thing today with left-wing organizations. I mean, we see today that the president is using Antifa as this boogeyman. You could change the word to communism or communist, and you could be in the 50s.
I've often referred to this time, and I don't know if this will catch on, but it's just the third Red Scare in a sense of like what we're talking about.
Right.
Did you see the meme or the conspiracy theory he tweeted about the 75-year-old Antifa member? Like,
yeah.
I'd seen that go around, like, but I just put it in the same category with George Floyd was a Freemason sacrifice. Like, I was like, oh,
I haven't seen that.
These are total garbage theories. I'm going to put this over here. And then I saw Trump tweet that or retweet it, and I was just like, is this real? And like, as far as I can verify, yeah, he did send out that tweet. That was
He
his
did, absolutely. I followed that pretty closely on Twitter. And you have to understand where he's getting his news from to understand why he tweets these things. But he gets his news from One American News Network, OANN, and OANN, the reporter this was a news story. I mean, I should back up and say OANN is not a news organization. It is a propaganda organization. And they had this whole story throughout the day before he tweeted this, about this man, this 75-year-old man who is a Catholic peace protester, being part of Antifa. And this is what the president is seeing and hearing. And the journalist who put this story out worked for Sputnik, the Russian propaganda network. Yeah. So, I mean, if you see where he's getting his news, it's no surprise that that he's tweeting these things. And you see the same things in the 50s too, where you have this propaganda spread throughout this network that exists mostly in the South. You have pockets of massive resistors throughout the country, but mostly in the South. And because you're seeing this information, these propaganda messages, these false news stories crop up in different parts of the South, you're more likely to believe them. And so he saw that story on OANN. Trump saw supporters retweeting that and tweeting it. He tweets it, and then now everyone in the country is talking about this stuff. And so in the 50s, you don't have a president who's willing to support the most radical ideas. But as a region, many Southerners believe some crazy things about African Americans, about civil rights organizations, and that's how that propaganda spreads.
What are some of those beliefs that you've found shocking? Like, one thing I've been trying to convey to people is like, hey, let's talk about all the things that were segregated, right? Water fountains, like it just go, and I usually stop around 10 different things that people use quite often. And they're like, oh, that's a lot. That's more than I thought.
Yeah, everything.
But like what sort of justifications is another thing I see that I just find hard to wrap my mind around. Like I really can't wrap my mind around people arguing that that schools shouldn't be integrated, right? Like it went down, like in the way that it went down in our state. But like, what are some arguments that you run across that are common that you see, like a lot of people saying the same things? And is that directly connected to propaganda or?
Well, there's a whole range of things. So on the far propaganda side, you have this belief, and in many of the letters that I've read, especially from religious figures, you have this belief that if integration happens, then there will be Black men that rape white women. It will be the end of the white race, and that is just going to happen. They just absolutely believe that that is going to happen. And they are convinced of this, and they are, that's part of that propaganda network. On the other side, you have more, I guess respectable. They definitely would have thought of themselves as respectable, and most members of their communities would have thought of themselves as, or thought of them as being respected. But they're arguing that it's actually better for African-American students and teachers to remain segregated. So the idea is that if you integrate, Black teachers will lose their jobs, and that Black students can't learn from white teachers, and white teachers don't know how to teach Black students. And so those arguments are being made, and we see that today, this whole, we see people like white people making the argument that Black people don't want this. Black people say that there's not systemic racism. And that's the same kind of argument that was in the 50s. Like, African-American teachers don't want to integrate, so why should we force them to integrate? So you have this whole range from the most extreme to a more, I guess, an easier to swallow argument, or more mainstream argument.
So what are you seeing? Are you seeing commonalities? That's what I've been trying to kind of point out to people is like, for example, the Emmett Till situation over the whistling, and the same situation with his dad. But people are like, oh, that's not still around. And it's like, well, here's this sign that they put up in 2008, and here's it repeatedly getting vandalized. So this time they shot it 317 times. So people just think because they don't see it, that it doesn't go on. And then, like, but are you seeing commonalities? Like, we did a podcast the other day, Thurman and I, about the sort of commonalities between 1968 and right now, right? And talked about a bunch of different things, but like, what are some things you see that are recurring in terms of arguments or themes or justifications or ways you see racism still rearing its ugly head?
Actually, I mean, it's almost parallel, because you can see the arguments about demeaning George Floyd's character. I mean, you saw those with Emmett Till. You saw those throughout the lynchings of the 1950s, and the you know, it's okay that the cop killed George Floyd because he was a criminal. You know, it's okay that Emmett Till was lynched even though he was 14 years old because he whistled at this white woman. So those arguments are definitely there. And then the political arguments about, you know, what I was talking about earlier, the teachers saying that, or white politicians saying that Black teachers don't want integration. You have the same thing today with people bringing up like Candace Owens, saying that using her as an example to say that Black people don't support this movement as a whole, whether it's made up or it's a single person or it's used as propaganda. These same ugly arguments, people are scared. And white people are scared of losing their place in society. And they were scared of that in the 1940s. They were scared of that in the 1950s. And you see that same desperation in these memes and these Facebook posts and the Twitter posts that I've seen throughout these letters. Just people trying to grasp at any single argument that they can make that people will agree with to justify racism, to downplay systemic racism, to say, or to try to silence anti-racist whites. That was another huge deal in the 1950s, is that you do have liberal white Southerners, you do have anti-racist white Southerners and civil rights activists who were white Southerners, but they were also silenced. I mean, one of the biggest tools that the Citizens Council had at their disposal was the ability to people, if you spoke out against racism or in favor of civil rights, you could lose your job. If you had a business that depended on ads, you would lose your advertisers. You could be pushed, if you were a teacher, you could be pushed out of school. White Southern pastors who preached messages of equality were kicked out of their churches. And so that's part of the power that massive resistors had at that time. And so far, what I'm seeing in this era is that that's not happening as much. We're actually seeing racists pushed out of their employment and racists being outed online. And so I think that is a really positive shift, kind of in the same with the Confederate monuments going down. As a society, we seem to be more, the majority of us seem to be on the right side of this, where in the 50s and 60s, the majority wasn't.
Do you think social media could be the cause of that?
I do. I think social media can be, I think overall, when we look at this, social media will have done a lot of bad things. I mean, be the cause for a lot of polarization and a lot of bad things. But I do think because social media connects people from so many different places, that you can experience ideas and thoughts from around the world, even if you never leave your hometown. And that was not something that, without social media, you don't have the ability to talk to different people the way you do now. And I also think that white Southern liberals can see that we're not the minority anymore, that there are people around the country that support us and that we don't have to be silent any longer. So I think that even if social media turns out to be a very bad thing for society, this is at least one positive of it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's just it. You know, the thing too about social media is it's just, It's just the easily accessible actions and thoughts of people. It's just what
Right.
people are. It's a good representation, and I think that there's a lot of importance in, like you said, you put in the time. You spent dozens of hours reading about the hate in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the justifications, and you're going to get to tell that to people that come to your class and that you're in, some people that you're friends with and you encounter. But I think that social media allows us to see, like, oh man, like sometimes you could, like the acid in the swimming pool, like you just see that, like that turned a lot of people of like, oh my, I would never condone what that image is trying to bring me into that. I was kind
Right.
of on the train until then, or like I've just heard some people make remarks like that. But I think that, like when I see, and I try not to always make snap judgments either, but when I see memes like that combine in the field, I'm just like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's another thing that's hard too, is are these people better served by because everybody's like, unfriend me this, I'm defriending this person, unfollow that. It's like, are we better served to keep in contact with these people so they can see our posts and maybe gain empathy? Or, I mean, I feel like through education that it is possible to overcome some of these things. So like, where are you on that?
I definitely think that education is key. And in the last 3 weeks, I've posted more on social media than I have probably ever in my life, because I do think that it is important to get historians have a vital role to play in this moment, because we've not seen this exact moment before, but this is definitely part of the larger civil rights movement. And so I mean, just like you've been doing on social media, like trying to educate people about our past and why this is still an issue, and that this isn't the first time that we fought this battle. And hopefully we'll see real change, not just this surface monuments coming down change. I mean, that's important, but we need real change. And so I completely agree with you that education is important, but I have to admit that the posts that bothered me were people posting that they would run over protesters. And this is not some abstract idea. This has happened. I mean, Charlottesville, the woman was killed when a Klan member, a white supremacist, ran into a crowd of people with his car. And I did unfriend people that I saw sharing that meme, because I think at some level, if you're willing to joke about violence against peaceful protesters or violence against someone that disagrees with you, you're not going to listen to anything I say. Like, you're already in such a bubble that you think it's okay to put that in public, then you're either not seeing my post anyway, or you do not care. And I'm conflicted about that, because I do agree that education is key. And the more educated you become, the more you can empathize with other people. Whether you understand it completely or not, sometimes it's better that just to not say anything at all. Like, no one's asking you, are you going to run over protesters? You're willingly putting that out there. And I think that takes a bubble and a level of comfort that most people are not willing to get out of.
Yeah. So, let me ask you this: is kind of change it up a little off topic, but so a guy that I spend a substantial amount of time with is coming on the podcast tomorrow, and it's been a pretty constant fixture in my life for about 11 years. Would be Dr. Jeff Woods, right?
Yep.
So,
yeah.
If I'm correct, you're studying with his dad, Dr. Rendell Woods.
Yes. Yes.
What's that like?
They are very different. Rendell Woods he's been, so the reason I even started down the road that I did is because of Jeff Woods. So he wrote this book, Black Struggle, Red Scare, that talks about how the Red Scare was different in the South because you link communism with civil rights. And he kind of pointed me in the direction. He's like, how does this fit into Arkansas politics? What did this look like here? And then I found Jim Johnson. And so I already was kind of molded in that direction going into the University of Arkansas. So Randall Woods was ready for me. He knew I was coming. He knew I was going to ask him to be my advisor. He also writes political biographies the way that my first book will be a political biography of Jim Johnson. So he's just been extremely supportive. It's working with someone who has the same interest as you and is just as like fascinated by the political dynamics that exist in the country, especially in the South. I just couldn't ask for a better advisor.
Yeah, that's super
it's amazing
awesome.
being kind of part of that family in a way. They're just great people. They're just great people and great historians.
Yeah. So here's a guy that Jeff Woods, Dr. Woods the younger, Jeff Woods turned me on to, is somebody you might look into. He's doing some fascinating research right now and talking about race and the military, and just say it's moving forward though. But he's an Asian, like an expert on North Korea or Asian American relations. His name's Dr. Mitch Lerner, and Woods knows him. He works at Ohio State, which is where Woods, I believe, got his PhD. And I thought that they had like gone. I don't know how they know each other. They didn't go to school together. But that guy got some fascinating commentary. I had him on Facebook recently, and he's like one of my favorite people to see post. But he was going to the protests and filming, and his daughter works for CNN.
Wow.
And she was pepper sprayed 3 times.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
3 times.
Yeah. In Columbus, if I'm not mistaken, is where that was. But he has been someone fascinating to kind of follow along and tune in. He's an expert on the Pueblo incident, which is like January of '68. We did a whole podcast about it. But it's the U.S. spy ship getting that's like, some people argued at the time and still that it was like a smoke and mirror for Tet. But that would actually, Lerner, for example, he says that, probably not, But he's been somebody awesome to talk to that I got connected to because of Woods. And I was like, I hit him up the other day. I was like, you got any more of them Mitch Lerner type people I could talk to? Right. But it is, man, that's what's awesome about the podcast is I may never get to talk to Randall Woods like you have, but I could talk to you, and getting to talk to other historians. And like I've had a physicist on the podcast that teaches at Tech. It's great. It's great to keep learning and to talk to as many people as I can that have different points of view.
Yeah. And that's what, as I think to be a historian, you have to want to accumulate knowledge. Like we want to learn things. We want to learn about people and places, and we want to know as much as we can about those things. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that you want to talk to everyone you can.
Well, and that's like when a bunch of people ask me about like, why did you start the podcast? And I'm like, well, the short answer is like kind of what I just said. It's like, well, it makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because of just everything I'm into. And, I have spin-off podcasts just for martial arts, so I don't convolute my audience too much. But, what does the post coronavirus world look like for you? Like you said, about how much more time you think you have left on your dissertation?
Well, I was supposed to finish in May of 2021, but everything shut down in March, and I was actually granted research leave, so kind of like sabbatical for the spring semester. But in March, all of the archives that I needed to travel to shut down. Yeah, and right now some are open by appointment, which is fine when I need to travel to Little Rock. But it's not okay when I need to go to Oxford, Mississippi or Montgomery, Alabama. And so I'm not sure about that May 2021 date right now. But I'm supposed to, that's still my plan, but we'll see how the fall and next spring go. But that's when I'm supposed to finish. I'm teaching a course at the University of Arkansas for history majors in their senior year this fall, called Massive Resistance. So I actually get to teach all about massive resistance for the first time. I'm so excited about this class. And it's just the right moment, because we will be right in the middle of the white backlash to what is happening this fall. We will know how the Trump campaign plans to spend this. We'll know if it's successful. We'll know what Southern politicians are going to try to do, because they've got to get this together before the November election. So we're going to see the massive resistance to this wave of the civil rights movement this fall. And so I'm so excited.
Hey, do you have any reading suggestions for me that like you might be using in that class or anything like? Because I just started using Audible this year, and it's like changed my whole life. Like it really has.
Yeah.
Like because if I'm exercising, it got me exercising more too, because it's like it's just weird. I'm like, audiobooks, exercise, I do them both at the same time, and theoretically, according to scientists, me exercising while I'm listening to it helps my retention. But so what would you suggest? Any recommendations?
Yeah, for sure. So and I know this book is on Audible, but this is more for the lost cause, but she goes into this. Heather Cox Richardson released a new book called How the South Won the Civil War. And it's all about the development of the lost cause and how that plays out over time, which is hand in hand with massive resistance.
Got it.
And it is, you're a historian, so it doesn't necessarily have to be accessible, but I would recommend this reading for anyone who is just more interested in that part of history.
Well, I want to like our syllabi for the program that I teach at it needs updated really bad. Just like the references and within that. So like I'm actually accumulating and sort of like I'm going into my third year of teaching full time, and I'm starting to develop more of I'm spending less time developing and getting better at going through my courses, and more like, okay, well I got this book, interjected that. I would like to add that to the reading list on down the line. Anything else that you would recommend for me or just anybody listening?
If you haven't read Black Struggle, Red Scare,
I
definitely need to. Yeah, I mean that's my book. That's like you all. In the PhD program, we joke that we all have like a Bible. We all have that one book that either set us off or we need it, and that's my academic Bible. But there's a new book been released about the Citizens Council. I thought I had it handy. A lot of the research on massive resistance is still not published. There are a few anthologies that have been published, but a lot of that is available in article form. But people are... In the 60s, you have in the 60s and 70s, you have these like two foundational texts on massive resistance and on the Citizens Council. And those things aren't updated until the early 2000s. Like you don't really see additional scholarship because you see this blossoming of civil rights scholarship, which of course, you need to get that civil rights scholarship out to the masses. It's not fun studying racists. It's not fun. It's not. It's super uncomfortable. Living in the head of these people. Yeah. And so I can see why a lot of that literature isn't there yet. But I am hopeful, and there are some great scholars of massive resistance and scholars who study the rise of modern conservatism. Kevin Cruz is one of those scholars. He's written a few books. And he's one of those historians that really uses social media to spread history to the masses. He's especially active on Twitter. Heather Cox Richardson, the woman that that wrote How the South Won the Civil War, does a nightly letter to Americans where she breaks down all of the major political happenings of the day and puts them into a historical context. I start my day with that every day. So that's another
was that like a blog she does?
It's an email, and she posted on Facebook as well. Yeah. Okay. But that's an excellent source to go to give you that kind of historical context for the day. And there are tons of civil rights and anti-racism books. And I've seen those lists circulating on social media all throughout the week.
Let me ask you about this one. And I haven't read the book, but I've watched the author on a couple of podcasts, and I haven't had a lot of time that would be like a read that I would do if I had a lot of extra time. And I want to read it. It's high on my list of physical books, but there's not an audiobook, but it's Clandestine Relationships. Have you heard of this?
I haven't.
Okay, so he was on. I just sent this to Meredith, right? This guy, he is a blues, or yeah, like a piano player, like knows Jerry Lee Lewis, piano player.
Oh wow, yeah.
He's a black man, but like he's like that level. So he writes this book about his journey getting people that are in the Klan to become his friend, leave the Klan, and they always give them like he's like, hey, will you give me your robes so I could keep those and make a museum out of them one day, right? And tell this story. But
Wow.
he's probably in his 60s. But he was on Joe Rogan's podcast. That's how I got turned on to him. And I've listened to it twice. It's super good, but it's just, he tells this story about like coming into contact with this Klan leader and how tense it was, and like an ice cube in a bucket like fell, and like this guy's guard, like I want to say like maybe pulled a gun and dropped, like so, like this, like
Yeah,
you could cut the tension with a knife.
Yeah.
But what I keep thinking about with all of this is like I asked you about education earlier, if that is a not a cure all, but if it could bring some of the masses in that are on the other side of the fence. Whereas this guy's just like, hey, yeah, they, I'm a black man and they became my friend. And through becoming my friend and me talking to them in an unemotional way about their ideologies and about history, they became my friend. And then they quit the Klan. And he started like, so like where the first story is he was playing in a bar with a band, just like got together and they played. And he was talking to this guy after at this table who's just like mind blown about how good of a piano player he is. Well, then come to find out that guy's in the Klan. And people are kind of poking fun at him at the table for even talking. They're like, yeah, we know you're in the Klan, dude. And you're sitting here talking to this black guy about his music. And he befriends that guy. And if my memory serves me correct, that's the first guy that he kind of goes through this process with. But then I guess, sees that it's a thing and pursues it like 20 times over. Daryl Davis, clandestine relationships.
Yeah, I'm going to write that down.
Yeah.
But that sounds fascinating.
Yeah. The podcast is great. I may have reshared it on my podcast page, but I'm trying to tell everybody about it because that's just like a beacon,
right.
just like knowing that there are some images and things that people can see and read that can increase their empathy and cause them to shift. I mean, I was not raised in a way that lines up with my ideologies today, for sure. Right. Like I was homeschooled till 8th grade. I grew up in a super conservative Christian household. I mean, I even like my dad had a talk with me one time about like the type of girls I should be dating, and it's just like how much of that is propagated and comes from his time and generation. And it's in like, for example, I'm from Johnson County. So that's like Clarksville. You pass Coal Hill on I-40 on your way to Fayetteville. Well, my dad graduated from this school, Hartman High School. Their mascot was the Hawks, right? Lots of chicken hawks around there. But my aunt was born and she graduated from the Ozarks. She was born in 1970. When she was in 8th grade, they did another school consolidation, and their mascot became the Rebels, the Johnson County Rebels, and their Confederate battle flag and so on. But it's just like that is, that's still being perpetuated today. She was telling me just the other day, we were talking about all this, about how she was 14 years old and that was still going on. She was still being taught the Lost Cause myth, and she's like the youngest child, and then I was talking with my friend who graduated in like 99 and he was taught the Lost Cause myth.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I was like, well, maybe I wasn't even paying attention. I don't even remember what they taught me, but because I really, what I'm saying is until I got to college, I did not I have exposure to these ideas as a young person, as a teenager, as a young adult. And I didn't go back to school and get my undergraduate until I was 23 in 2009. So But just that short like, you've been out of grad school as long as I went to undergrad and grad's like 7 years. And I tell people repeatedly, like, since I've got out, I haven't even been doing what you're doing, how much I've learned. And I know part of that is teaching, and you teach too.
Right, right.
Like, and it's truly amazing to get up and just learn every day, like, and that be a part of your natural process that you engage with.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I do find that, and I tell my colleagues that aren't teaching yet, when you get in the classroom, you will learn more than you did in our seminars. I mean, you learn big ideas and important ideas in the seminar, but once you start teaching that narrative, and you're teaching it in a way that students who don't know much about history, because a lot of our undergrads they've either still learned the lost cause, or they just don't know much about history at all. So you're having to teach that narrative in a way that you learn it better yourself. Students ask great questions, and you're forced to answer and grapple with those questions, which is really important. So I agree with you completely about learning more. That really plays a monumental role in how much we learn is by teaching.
Why do you think so many? I'm sorry, I keep asking you a ton of like kind of heady questions, but like, why do you think I've been guilty of it? Why do so many people just stop learning? Like, even when they get out, like, oh, I'm out of college, learning
Right.
spigots turned off now. Like, I watch documentaries on the History Channel occasionally at night, but that's it.
Right.
Like, I mean,
Right.
even myself, like, I was not reading books. I was not doing things that I needed to really be doing until I started teaching. And like, now it's like I'm just always motivated to do it. I got in the habit of it. I created some great habits, but so many people just turn that faucet off. Like, and I've struggled to know why. And is that just the easy way out?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I grew up in a household of learners. Until the 7th grade, I moved multiple times across the South. Lived in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, and my mother and stepfather really pushed the idea of this continuation of learning. Like, you're always asking questions. I was a critical thinker at a very young age because I had that environment, and they were constantly learning and taking us places. And then in 7th grade, I moved to Dover. And Dover has its own whole racist past that it has to deal with, that it had not dealt with in the early 2000s.
Into that very much? Because I've heard, they used to be the county seat, right?
Right.
But I don't know much about the history of Dover, but I've heard that from several people.
Yes. So the state's first populist racist governors around the turn of the 20th century, Jefferson Davis, not.
Yeah.
He's from Dover.
Yeah.
Celebrated Dover native. Dover is also the site of the last known lynching in the state. Dover was a sundown town, which means that if you were an African American, you would not be safe in the town of Dover after dark.
See, I've heard that about Hartman. That small community I was just mentioning to you, that it was a sundown. I was just talking with my aunt about it.
Yeah. And I've spoken with lots of older Dover natives who never knew African Americans until they were much older, and never even met a Black person until they were much older. So it's a lot easier to foster that racism and that bias in a community where you don't have anything to counter that. And at that point, you don't have social media. You don't have the sources that we have today that get us out of that bubble. And so I went from being in school with lots of different people, lots of different teachers. I'd had Black teachers before, and then going to Dover, where it's all white. I mean, we had one African American student the whole time I was in school. I mean, it was a complete shock. And I was put into this world where people didn't want to learn. Not even in school, but like, you got your high school degree and you were done. I mean, you didn't, and it's still, I don't know. I don't understand the people that would rather just shut that down instead of grow as people. It is a question that I have too. And it's a question that I ask myself when I read these letters and study the politicians, the people who are actually perpetuating these ideas. They're intelligent people. they're playing on the fears of less intelligent people. Not that those people can't be intelligent. They don't want to learn. They don't want to research this stuff. And so it's the people writing the letters that fascinate me. Their willingness to accept these things from these men without questioning them, without looking into them themselves, without further learning. Another thing that I was thinking about earlier, when you mentioned the Klan, the Citizens Council despised the Klan publicly. They said that they were better than the Klan. They weren't like the Klan. They weren't terrorists like the Klan. They weren't going to burn your house down like the Klan. And they used that to make themselves look more respectable publicly. But if a Klansman did kill a civil rights activist or did burn someone's house down, they bailed them out of jail. They provided the legal defense of that person. And so it's this, you've got this radical element that the mainstream says they're not supporting, but they are behind closed doors. So they knew what they were doing. They knew that they wanted to be perceived as more respectable. And we see the same thing. We see the same thing today.
Do you know anything about hate groups in Arkansas presently? I do not, honestly. Like I teach about the second Klan and like 1900 and beyond, and obviously go big time into it during Reconstruction. I love Who Shot John Clayton. That was the book. I really just went super.
I do enjoy that book too.
Yeah.
Yes.
But do you have any idea where we are with those types of hate groups today? Like I know we had a billboard put up on 40 within the last several months that got taken down.
Yeah, I know that Billy Roper is the main white supremacist in Arkansas. Have you heard of
Shield
him?
Wall Network, yeah.
Yeah, he's a graduate of Tech, has a master's in history from Tech, which is, but he is involved in multiple, the Southern Poverty Law Center has a great page on him specifically. And according to him, there are multiple white supremacist organizations operating in the state. I have never seen, he's a Russellville native. He could have shown up to the Black Lives Matter protest. He didn't. There's multiple times where if he has groups as large as he says he does, he could show up. He doesn't. So I think that the propaganda is much louder than the actual membership rolls in the state. But besides him, the only other white supremacist organization that I know operates in the state is the Aryan Brotherhood.
I've been seeing people post about this attorney out of Harrison, that there's some sort of prominent family up there, and I've heard that in passing.
Yeah, I saw that post. And it's like his family in Klan regalia, right?
Yeah. But I, and I was like, I don't know anything about this guy, or somebody hates him and photoshopped this.
Right.
But I did some surface, just looking online, and probably true. It looked to be likely, but I've always heard that about Harrison, but I saw a bunch of peaceful protests coming out of Harrison too. So
Yes, and that was, the headquarters of the Klan, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, is right outside of Harrison, not actually in the city limits, but right in this little township right outside of Harrison. So I think that has been established. The membership levels of that are unclear. But again, you have this protest in Harrison, and if you have a significant Klan presence, you would expect them to be there. But the protest looks like it went very well. Yeah. That's very promising for this state to have had any Black Lives Matter protest in Harrison, let alone one that looked like it had good attendance.
Do you have any thoughts, and this would be purely speculation, on these agent provocateurs we're seeing at these protests? Do you think those are white supremacists? Do you think it's Antifa? Do you think it's a mixture of both? Do you think it's a conspiracy that it's Antifa when it's really white supremacists? That's what I'm like, oh guys, like, why is that? What, the umbrella man, the pallets of bricks, all of that is just like these rogue factions hijacking this. I don't know what to make of it, and I know we can't really make anything of it. I've talked about it, thought about it, and asked people smarter than me about it.
Right.
That's one thing that just is blowing my mind here. That umbrella man incident, for example, is just like, what are
Yeah.
you doing, man?
Yeah, no, it's definitely nuanced. I mean, there's a lot going on. I mean, this was a moment that a lot of different people took advantage of. I do think that if you base this off the civil rights movement, I mean, King and Martin Luther King and his supporters were very clear that they had to be peaceful protests, and they knew that they had to get beaten up to get national attention. Like that, King knew that, because you're not going to get white America's attention if there's just peaceful marches. You need to get Bull Connor in Birmingham to beat up kids and water hose them, or JFK's never going to pay attention to the plight of people of African Americans in Alabama. And so you see those similarities. And so there is definitely a white supremacist presence at the Black Lives Matter protest. And I think that probably a lot of that was to undermine the movement. Because if you didn't have journalists in the 60s taking pictures of Bull Connor spraying these kids or spraying civil rights protesters, the public doesn't know about it, and Bull Connor can say the damage was caused by anyone he wants to. And so you had those white supremacists in the 60s trying to undermine those peaceful events as well. And so I definitely think there's some of that. But I think that was just, I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic. People are laid off. There's a lot of unrest in the country anyway. It was just like the perfect, I mean, these events were primed for this disruption and people taking advantage of this.
Well, and some of it would too, you have to beg the question, like I just thinking about all sides. It's like, look, some of these people doing the looting and rioting, they would have been breaking the law doing something else. No pandemic, no anything, no racial conversation or anything. People break the law and commit crimes and break and enter and steal, and and some of the people that were caught looting, they're interviewed and they're like, why'd you do this? And well, I was just out here trying to make an easy buck, man. Like I was going to be doing this anyway. Yeah. And I get that, but trying to think about all the different factions that are playing into this protest, they're outside of the people that are peacefully protesting, which is the vast majority.
Right.
But, you know, it's, I did see a video of Minneapolis. It wasn't filmed today, but I saw it today. I think it was like a week ago. But man, I can't believe the destruction that I didn't realize it was as bad as it was with the number of burned buildings. And it looked like a literal war zone. That's all I could say. Right.
And we saw these same types of things after King's assassination, after Rodney King in 92. I mean, this type of rioting and rage from a community that is oppressed and constantly told to stay in the lines and stay peaceful. And when that stuff doesn't work, I mean, there's going to be an outlet. There's going to be this type of a reaction to that. But I think in these cases, there's a lot or a significant amount of people trying to undermine this or co-opt this moment for their own purposes as well. And based on the police reports and the DOJ reports that have been released, it does appear that there's a significant amount of white supremacy playing into this.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. And I've heard from multiple people, and it wasn't these guys that are local, but I heard that members of Shield Wall were at the Valley Park Center here in Russellville. And they weren't, I don't know if they were members from the local community or whatever. It wasn't that group allegedly that was down at our courthouse at City Mall and stuff, walking around with the assault rifles. But I heard from multiple sources that down at the Valley Park Center, some of those people guarding the businesses were from Shield Wall.
Yeah. So, and they may have been. I did see one of the men that was at one of the three men that showed up at the courthouse on the 31st with his assault weapon ready to protect whoever he thought he was protecting against these mostly women and children that were at the protest, and scared a lot of the children that were at these protests or at the protests. I did see that he is trying to create, he's from Dover, and he's trying to create a militia, the Polk County Minutemen, to help the police. And
well, I
just think that kind of stuff is so dangerous.
he might, say that he supports the movement or whatever, but he's posting xenophobic stuff on his page,
Yes,
calling
yes,
Obama a Muslim and talking
straight
about,
propaganda.
while also quoting the Bible. And it's
Right.
just like, it's
It's
very,
always couched in religion. The whole, I mean, that was a huge part of the massive resistance. And you're fighting communism too, so you're overly Christian in the 50s anyway, as a way to combat communism, or the perception of communism. And so religion plays, I mean, there are so many biblical justifications of segregation and racism and that is poured throughout the letters that I read. Always this religious undertone. And so, yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that you're seeing that propaganda come out of these people. And I hope that, and I hope that in 2020, these people are the minority, even here in Arkansas, even across the South. They may not be, but I do think that, again, white liberals and white anti-racists in the South are receiving a lot more support than they were in the 60s.
well, and did you follow my post I shared? Apparently just going to college makes you a white liberal these days.
I saw that. Oh, they did not like that.
Oh,
People
that was
did not
funny.
like that at all.
I made another pass over that today, and I was like, just want to clarify, I did not insult
I saw that.
anyone's intelligence level, even though 11 of you took it that way. And then this other guy commented on a later post I made, and I was just like, bro.
Yeah.
And I could see it coming across that way, but at the same time, I was just kind of voicing my disdain of like people who haven't been to college talking about what my teachers taught me and how it made
Right. Right.
There's just no way to quantify that. And I love how Jeff Woods was like, actually, these studies here. he shared all these links, and I was like, he's like, here are the results of the links, and I was like, yeah, because a bunch of people aren't going to read those.
Right. Right.
And even people were like, I don't have time to read these. But yeah, that was and that's a great point. But it's like my contention is just this: if anything, everything that we're talking about placed me all over the place. Like, in terms of my political beliefs and me being a business owner, there's just certain things like as a business owner that I would look at things like economically conservative, but that is like about the only area that I would ever share a conservative belief with a mass number of people that are also, but then it's like, oh, well, you should be that political leaning because that's what's going to be beneficial for you. And I'm just like, no, that's I just have like, it's hard to peg me into any political hole. And I've been super dissatisfied the last 2 cycles of elections and my choices. I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? But, I hope that a lot of how Trump is responding to this, I hate to say that because like I've been pegged as a Trump supporter by somebody at the gym before. They're like, I know that Brian's a Trump supporter. And I'm like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Yeah, I've never thought that about you.
Yeah, but somebody did, probably because I honestly think I made a joke about Alex Jones, like a joke, like, like, haha, he's out there. But like I was like, and I think they may have heard it or something and thought I was a Trump supporter or something. But, honestly, like I really don't ever make my political beliefs known, nor like I said, it's kind of hard to peg them in, but I get stereotyped a lot.
Yeah. And today, like people think that historical facts are debatable or historical facts make you political. Like being anti-racist, I guess, is now a democratic thing, which it's not a political issue. That is a moral issue. Everything is so political. And we've been taught, especially in the South. I mean, even in my family, it was not polite to discuss politics. We had our opinions, and I was politically aware at a very young age, but that's just not something we talked about. So when every single social issue is politicized, then we can't talk about anything. And again, racism is not a political issue, it's a moral one. And so we've gotten to the point where we can't have these discussions for fear of being either for fear or of being labeled in a certain political camp, or they're going to shut down because they automatically think you're in a certain political camp.
Well, I was talking to Woods about this the other day, and I maybe you can give me some suggestions here, but I was like, hey man, like, and he told me to look into Nixon's Southern strategy, right? But
Yeah.
I was like, at what point did it, and I was like, and I'm generalizing here, but at what point did racist people kind of swap parties? It's like, I was like, in a roundabout way, without me trying to simplification. I was like, what is that? And he's like, well, that really started with Nixon trying to bring in the Southern Democrats.
Yeah, in 68.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we usually say that 68 is that turning point. That's when Southern Democrats vote for Nixon and the Republican Party. But that process starts in 48. So it's a long process, almost a generational process, with the split, the Southern Democrats splitting from in the Dixiecrats, and then it culminates in the Southern strategy. And then you have modern conservatism with Reagan. And so you take all these social issues that Southerners are more conservative on, you put those into the Republican Party, that's solidified with Reagan, and then you have the modern Republican Party, the modern conservative movement.
Nice. Okay. Well, any other suggestions on that? Like one book, and I'm going to go back through it. I haven't read it since grad school, but America's Right-Hand Turn. Have you ever read that?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, it was like, I got to go back and reread it. I've kind of forgotten all the points, other than it's kind of connected thesis-wise to what we're talking about. But any other good books you could recommend on that topic?
Really anything by Kevin Kruse. He traces this process. He traces the rise of modern conservatism. Carrie Frederickson wrote The Dixiecrat Revolt, where she starts it in 48. Kruse doesn't always go all the way back to 48, but Carrie Frederickson started in 48, and she traces it through. I disagree with some of her analysis of the Dixiecrats themselves, just because she doesn't focus on Laney, and I've been through Laney's papers, and he plays a more important role than she highlights in that book. But it traces the rise of modern conservatism well. That culminates in the 80s.
Awesome.
But anything by Kevin Kruse is always a good place to start.
Well, thank you for the suggestions. Like, that's been, and I'm building a blog right now, and I've write at about 50 books for this year that I've been able to get through, and I'm gonna do something with that, like with what I'm doing with my podcast and the gym. Like, I got a blog that's going to be featured on both of my websites, but really, I just, like everybody I've been podcasting with, I've been trying to get some book suggestions from, because it just keeps me feeling I'm always got like a history book going, some sort of something for the business I'm listening to, or just it varies. But I really appreciate the suggestions. I appreciate you taking the time to come on, and I'm sorry I had to reschedule on you.
Oh, that's fine. Thanks for inviting me. I would take any time, chance I get to talk about my work or about modern politics. I'm all over it.
Well, I would love to collaborate with you as much as possible. I will say I have a gigantic new studio that we have a new gym we just moved into. It's 8,000 square feet with its own entrance and exit. And nice. Thurman, who I've mentioned, he and his sister, Julie, who works actually at the U of A, they're going to start a spinoff show on my podcast called Arkansas Unraveled. And they're going to do like a season approach. And we're planning an episode around, I'm going to just help them with filming and stuff. But we're planning an episode around these Confederate monuments in the state, around Little Rock 9, different stuff. He's got a lot of ideas, but they're going to be rolling that out here pretty soon. So I'm excited about that, but maybe we can collaborate with you in the future. I've been talking
absolutely
with, other Arkansas historians, and talked with Dr. Jones a few times from Tech. So I would love to have you back on. If you ever have anything you just want to talk about, hit me up, because I do these near daily. So it's great getting to sit down with you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, good luck with everything you're doing, and hopefully it's not 5 years between when we talk again.
Surely not. Surely not.
All right. Have a great day, Marie. Thank you.
You too. Thank you. Bye.